not look fat. No, I don't think I could possibly manage that.
Not to look
Somebody said that to me the other day, and I was like, I don't think I have a problem with that, but okay.
I don't think so either.
No,
you're not.
All right.
Okay. Welcome to the final expedition. Today, as anticipated last week, we're talking about the picture of Dorian Gray. In a very brief summary, it's a book about a young man who gets a painting, and instead of himself aging and showing the marks of his decisions, the painting wears all of life's scars, and it gets so hideous that he doesn't even want to see it, because he's living a lifestyle which doesn't seem to be very responsible, which could be our first gateway into this book.
So hedonism, of course.
Yes. So, what is hedonism?
So
Aryn?
hedonism would be a lifestyle that is entirely self-orientated. So you want to maximize your pleasure in life to the highest possible area you can. You don't care about anyone else. So whatever you can do to achieve the maximum amount of pleasure is what you do. Do you think that's a relatively okay definition of hedonism?
That is a good definition. I would say it's also centered on the moment, right? So
absolutely.
It's focused on momentary, doing the thing that you want the most. And
it's all present tense.
Present tense, right?
Yeah.
Because if you say what is self-centered, what is best for yourself, I think you could say that actually in the long term, as the book outlines, Dorian Gray is not having that.
It doesn't end well for him, does it?
He sort of accumulates all of these amoral and bad decisions, and they all start to wear on him.
So, I mean, obviously Wilde is referencing Narcissus, so narcissism in a sense. So Dorian Gray is would you call it an archetype of a narcissist? At least that's what I think Wilde is trying to present. Obviously, Oscar Wilde's getting the definition or sort of the idea of this from the Greek tragedy of Narcissus, who looks into the pool of water, sees his reflection, falls in love with his reflection, and then drowns in the water. In a sense, to a certain extent, actually, that's exactly what happens to Dorian Gray. Right. He falls in love with his image. I do get a distinct impression this is a very strong social narrative. We could sort of almost look at it as vanity in the modern age. Sort of to what extent is vanity dangerous? At least that is, I think, there's more depth to what Oscar Wilde's trying to present with Dorian Gray, but I think on the surface that's essentially.
Could you explain to me what vanity is, because I don't understand the word?
Okay, so vanity would be like looking in the mirror.
So self-love.
Self-love, exactly.
Okay. So, interesting. Yeah, definitely we can talk about the bigger social implications of this book. I mean, he wrote it in the 19th century, I think.
Yeah, so it would have been a different era to what we have now. I think very much so, actually, a lot of the themes in the book are more representative of our age than they were when Oscar Wilde was writing them. If we think about it in terms of, let's take on the concept of narcissism, perhaps you could say this would have existed in the age that Oscar Wilde was writing, but certainly there are a number of people today that are famous simply for being famous. So if we sort of contextualize this in the book, Lord Henry calls it, I guess you could say Oscar Wilde, Dorian Gray's mentor, the person that he's influenced the most by within the book.
So that is Lord Henry.
Yeah, Lord Henry.
Yeah.
Talks about beauty being a form of genius, which is rather interesting. And we see that replicated within sort of contemporary, I guess, norms. It's almost, beauty is normalized to the point that you can be successful by having no other redeeming quality other than simply existing, in a sense. I don't know, what do you think about that? Do you think Oscar Wilde is hitting the brief there on the modern narrative?
I think that definitely in a lot of senses it's not even very metaphorical the way he describes Dorian Gray. I mean, modern day society, if we get a little bit philosophical about it, you have online influencers who, people fall in love with their picture, right? Because you're actually not seeing the real person, as we all know. You're seeing a condensed, maximal, beautiful, happy maybe a little bit edited version of a person.
Say more than a little bit edited, especially with modern technology.
So yeah, you can basically hide away all of your scars and insufficiencies, and that is fundamentally what is happening here to Dorian Gray. Now, he suffers the horrible consequences of that, right?
Yeah.
In the end, he kills himself by stabbing the picture that has gotten so ugly instead of him. And I think that is a very, very fitting narrative for contemporary, for the sort of dark side of this fame, right? This unearned fame that you only have for a certain picture that other people have from you. Because in the long run, it's not sustaining. Because you know about the insufficiencies, right? Even though the outside world doesn't see them.
Well, I mean, I think to an extent, yes, but there are certainly a lot of people that are extremely successful by leading a hedonistic lifestyle. In a sense, it's almost looked upon as being something to aspire to.
A virtue.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really strong way of putting it, but I agree. It's almost virtuous to be hedonistic.
Yeah, which I think is really weird.
I think it's completely backwards to me. But nevertheless, it is certainly one way to achieve success in a strange sort of an inversion of sort of social normality, in a sense.
Well, and we could go on about this a little bit, how it is connected to the short attention span of the internet. It's like if you're only able to present a personality within a couple of pictures. Pictures are always momentary, right?
Yeah.
They don't show... you don't look at a succession of pictures and see the progression of a person. You always see a brief moment. You want to maximize...
It's immortalized, a picture, it's in a sense. So
you want to maximize the beauty and like worthiness of that moment. So obviously you're going to resolve to a hedonistic view of the world. What do you think about that?
I agree, but of course, if we just look at something simple like standards of beauty or conceptions of beauty, they do change. So the way that the social influence changes what we consider to be beauty, for example, will change decade to decade in a sense.
Yeah.
So even though the immortalized image being represented in, say, society or online or something like that, it's not immortalized. It's still transitory in a sense, because what we would consider beauty standards, say, in the 90s, wouldn't... I mean, I'd still consider somebody from the 90s to be beautiful. I am from the 90s myself, but nevertheless, you can see a change in how the standards have formed. It sort of raises a question about to what extent does society actually influence our perceptions in that way, perhaps of beauty, but also of what we consider to be virtuous norms. So, and I'll be careful here, because what Oscar Wilde did in Dorian Gray is he basically set up a fall guy. Dorian Gray is, in a sense, the archetype of the narcissist who goes through the tragedy. It has a tragic end, and sort of as a social narrative, it's like, see, this is exactly what happens. We tend not to see that so explicitly done in this modern era of hedonism.
Because it goes out of the frame of interest as soon as the beauty wears off. So this is actually really interesting. Let's hope I have the capacity to formulate it properly. But Lord Henry, in the beginning, Lord Henry, this mentor, this, well, basically thought poisoner of Dorian Gray, who is telling him all of these ideas of hedonism, he outlines, first of all, his youth and beauty as a virtue, and then says that he must relish in the moment as long as he has it, because as sure as anything on this world is, it is going to pass, and then life is going to become very, very sad. And it doesn't pass for him, right? And that's why he stays in the spotlight for so long. But for modern influencers, as soon as the spotlight is passed, as soon as the prime of beauty is gone by, nobody cares.
No, it's true. Right? It's such a brief moment, if you like.
I don't know.
It is very true. I suppose, in a sense, a really important point actually to bring out from the book itself is we do see the consequence of Dorian's actions.
Right.
You tend not to perhaps even see that online, because like you said, it all happens so quickly and moves by so quickly that we don't actually get to track the consequence of the individual. We have no idea what happens to somebody once they drop out of the spotlight, for example, unless somebody's tracking it. Nor do we understand, or do we have a window into what the consequences of that lifestyle is for that individual.
Right.
Perhaps not manifested in a physical way. I'm thinking more of a psychological consequence here.
Yep.
Because I would say, even though the painting for Dorian Gray manifests physical changes, it's the psychological implication on Dorian himself, I think.
Yeah. So he outlines, for example, as he's involved in the suicide of a young girl, and
that's Sybil, the one that's
Sybil,
yeah,
right. Sybil Vane, who he feels responsible for to some extent.
Yeah.
He sees that the picture gets sort of like a sinful smirk,
Yeah.
like almost like somebody who has done something
bad.
you know, even though
Yeah.
that is not a physical thing
Yeah.
that happened there, but definitely it's a psychological picture as well as a physical. It shows the physical aging, but it also shows all of the scars left on the soul
Yeah.
of him that this lifestyle does. I mean, I found myself wondering at a lot of points in the book, I hope he wakes up and like Lord Henry doesn't have this influence anymore, specifically in the beginning. I was really hoping that he gets back to the person that actually painted the picture.
Yes.
Basil Hayward, and just
The purity, in a
Right.
sense, that is represented. Almost like the painting is what Dorian should be, or the potential for Dorian to be, in a sense. I did have an interesting point, actually. As a philosopher, and well, as an open thinker yourself, there seems to be a missed opportunity for Dorian here in terms of moral theory. He has a direct, by whatever mechanism is doing it, we don't know. I presume it would be some theological mechanism that's doing this for
Probably
Dorian.
God.
Yeah, in a sense. But Dorian is allowed to see the direct consequence of his moral action
Right.
by the change of the picture. We very seldom get to see that. We always have this sort of socially framed version of moral theory. But in a sense, for Dorian, if he does bad, for example, it manifested on the picture. It's sort of almost the perfect reflection, the perfect guide to see, well, what is moral action then according to whatever is the God or the theological perspective,
right.
or whatever is the the mechanism that's changing the picture. We don't have that in modern or in any state of existence. We simply have, if I sort of clarify this a bit further, somebody could go do something wrong, and if they're not discovered, that injustice, if you like, gets brushed under the carpet. In a sense, it might psychologically affect them, but there's no direct consequence visibly. And they could perhaps spend the rest of their lives without that ever actually really manifesting itself in that direct way. But for Dorian, you do see that direct manifestation. You've done bad, and there's the evidence of it.
there's a consequence. Yeah, I mean, in our life, it's all a little bit more, how would you say, procedural and slow, these kind of changes, right? So you don't have a particular moral action that your conscience considers immoral, and then that changes your personality, but it's like this gradual change that leads to the bad decision, and that sort of, it's difficult to like grasp in any moment, like to tell somebody, or if you see it in somebody else, or if you see it in yourself, to be like, this is it. Right.
Yeah.
you need to pay attention to this because this is getting immoral.
Especially if something's nuanced, or it's like grey, for example, where you're not actually sure what is the right course of action here.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, for Dorian, he'd only know on analysis, so you wouldn't be useful to sort of do, but you can learn that way, of course. So it is interesting, Dorian never learns from his mistakes.
No.
So despite having this almost perfect mirror, this perfect way of being able to tell, oh, am I being a good person or a bad person, he doesn't learn from that.
He can't learn. If Dorian Gray would learn, he wouldn't be the archetype of hedonism anymore.
No, exactly. Yeah.
You can only be a hedonistic so basically most people, including myself, and I guess including you, have a period in their life where they are somewhat hedonistic.
Of course, yeah.
Because it's just, you need to try it, right? And if you don't think about it for too long, it seems like a great way of going about things. But if you do it for a pre-lengthened period of time, you realize the consequences and then you have to grow out of it, literally. But he can't do that. He is the picture. He is stuck in the States when the picture was made. He can't learn of anything, right?
Is there a way out for somebody like Dorian Gray? Because he's obviously an archetypical narcissist in that sense. So a narcissistic behaviorism like that wouldn't tend to have a self-reflective mode, if you like.
So is there? I don't know.
I think for Dorian specifically, like I said, he was set up as a fall guy. So I don't think in Oscar Wilde's narrative there would be a way out for him. Sybil, I think, was his best chance.
Yes.
Somebody who, love. Somebody who represented innocence as well, in a sense, but yet has a fatal ending.
I mean, the fall of Sybil. So Sybil is like this second-class actress that plays in theaters, and nobody really knows her. She's sort of in the second-class theaters of London. Doesn't have a lot of money and all of that, but he falls in love with her performances on stage, with her acting, right?
So she's clearly talented.
She's talented, but it's also so interesting because he falls in love with the facade once again, right?
Yeah.
Same as with the picture, he falls in love with the illusion of Sybil, and then when he actually meets the girl with the complex emotions that the girl's having.
So in a sense, Dorian is projecting what he wants onto everyone. A bit like a narcissist does, of course.
Yeah.
But so that type of projection, I don't think there would be a way out. If somebody is stuck in that continued process of projecting only what they want onto an object, they're essentially objectifying everything, not treating the humanity. I don't think Dorian... I mean, to an extent, Dorian tries to admit that he looks at Sybil's innocence, but he sort of inverts it again onto himself. He looks at Sybil's innocence about how it affects him, not so much how he affects Sybil. He doesn't take direct consequence for that. Well, perhaps to a certain extent he later does because he commits suicide, but...
He has a brief moment where he does as well. So after the performance and he ended things with Sybil, he can't sleep for the night and he has this horror and thinks, oh, I've done this girl wrong. Maybe she is actually a decent person and maybe I need to see beyond the shallow husk of the human. And then his friend comes in and tells him that she committed suicide. And that's that.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
Like he's done until he kills himself.
Which is strange because you'd think an event like that would be quite significant, but in a sense, it for Dorian at least, it's not. I can't imagine. I'm not sure that's entirely unrealistic. Almost said realistic, but because I mean, people do behave in strange ways, especially narcissists in general. I don't know, because would somebody... I would consider that a psychological issue if somebody was not going to react.
I mean, he sort of reacts. The way he reacts is staying stuck in what he had before.
Yeah.
Because the moment that he writes down things about the innocence of the girl and starts reflecting on it, that moment gets instantly connected with her passing away, with her being lost forever. The moment he grasps the humanity, she's lost. So, what does he do? He regresses into the state.
He almost doubles down in a sense.
Right.
Would you say that would be a defensive mechanism of some sort?
Potentially.
In a sense, to not recognize one's fragility, because that's what Dorian's most afraid of.
Yeah.
Is mortality in a sense, losing that beauty and not having that fragility to know that we grow old and we
have to.
we stop looking like we once did when we were, I don't know, whatever age you considered your perfect conception.
No.
Now I'm well past it.
Spoken like a true narcissist.
Yeah.
No, I mean, yeah. I forgot the point now. But I think you said he's afraid of fragility.
Yes.
And then he doubles down on it. It's like, I think that is absolutely correct. because before Sybil, he didn't have any of these complicated emotions.
No, that's true.
So he says, well, I was in a state where everything was awesome. Go back to it. It will work. Problem is it doesn't, but...
In a sense, love doesn't conquer all, apparently, within this sense, at least from a narcissistic point of view. So
it also reminded me on like patterns of behavior of like intensive drug addicts. Or people
absolutely.
who flee from their reality,
Yeah.
even into anything really, and they double down on, well, now I'm gonna go out and smoke a spliff.
Absolutely.
But they don't see how that is actually connected to creating a hazard in the household that they're fleeing from, right?
Even if they do, though, there's a sort of a secondary issue where it's a case of they're so used to it, it's familiar territory in a sense. So if we look at habitual drug use, it's familiar, it's something you're comfortable with, so you're naturally going to return to where you feel the most accepted.
Right.
And for Dorian, that's the hedonistic lifestyle.
Yeah.
He has the least amount of complication in going into that direction. In the same way that a habitual drug user, even though they may even recognize the fatality of that type of lifestyle, it's something they're so familiar with, so comfortable with, there's less complication. As an anecdotal sort of story, when I was in America, I spent a lot of time speaking to homeless people, and a lot of them are not even homeless by circumstance. They're homeless by choice at a certain point. Obviously not all, some have terrible lives, but they were interesting who they can't return to normal life because the homeless lifestyle, they're comfortable with that, and nobody wants to be in that lifestyle, but there's so little way back at that point.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, in a sense, I mean, that's where mediation would come into pass.
It's tragic. They have, it's absolutely horrible.
What Dorian doesn't have is a mediator. He has no good influence.
No, because he has Lord Henry, who tells him that the way he's doing all of these things is perfect.
So let's look at Lord Henry, actually.
Yeah, he's the most interesting
I
character
agree.
as far as
I also think he's the biggest fake.
Yeah, of course. So Lord Henry is preaching all of these hedonistic lifestyle things and philosophies and romanticism and all of that, and he has a wife, and
exactly. He doesn't have any of that.
And he doesn't do anything.
Yes.
He's just preaching.
He's a fascinating character, and you do see a lot of that. I mean, to use the sort of the colloquial expression, big talk. You know, lots of hot air, being lots of gusto, but not so much any substance.
Right.
It took someone like Dorian to actually do his lifestyle, where he himself only spoke about it.
But we have to say, at least for me, very eloquently. In the first couple of pages, I read his monologues about the fatality of existence and how everything is sort of deteriorating. But
I think he's correct in that sense.
Fair enough. And I was listening, I was like, oh yeah, this is actually really cool, really deep. And then he says, so this is what we have to do. And I'm like, whoa, what?
Yeah, exactly. His analysis is correct. His solution is definitely a bit out there, in my opinion. I don't think the hedonistic way is the way forward.
No.
I do think we are living in a social environment, like we discussed earlier, that in a sense almost virtue signals the well, at least a part of society looks at that as something to achieve. Again, as a musician, I see that happen in music all the time, where sort of almost the music itself loses any real substance, and it becomes an act that's more sexually directed in certain areas of music.
Can you elaborate on that?
It's tricky because some of the people that I don't like using individuals as examples. As a general rule, I tend to avoid doing that. So this will be theater of the mind, if you like, so more abstract. But an individual who has, let's say, is not overly talented, perhaps, but has everything else that hits those check marks.
Yeah.
In a sense, the talent isn't what sells them.
Yeah,
it doesn't need to. You just need the facade there, and you need to get enough people interested in that. Mm-hmm. I mean, objectively, Oscar Wilde actually makes an interesting point in the I think it's in the introduction to his book, where he says all art is pointless.
Yes.
which is a great statement. I love that.
It points to itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of.
But there's no real objectivity to art. It's in a sense, it's supposed to be a subjective thing. I would argue there is an objectivity to art. I'm probably make a lot of people upset by that saying, but I think certain art's just rubbish. And it'll be the same with music. And sure, each to their own, each to their taste, but I think at the extent of the time, you can't compare, say, I don't know, Mozart's Requiem to something out there that's completely so generic, so frightfully generic, actually, that you could almost listen to it and go, it has zero substance to it, but yet the artist behind that, that's what's selling it, that's what's pushing it. Mm-hmm. And in a sense...
Well, and the catchiness, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So a lot of pop music is very easy to listen to.
Yeah.
Beethoven.
I like pop music, so...
Mozart's Requiem is certainly not easy to listen to. You need to listen to it like 10 times, I guess, before you start to really learn to appreciate the fullness of the music. And this pop music is very shallow, similarly to the hedonistic picture.
It's not even the shallow part that bothers me, in a sense. It's kind of how, if I get to my point, actually, how somebody who can have a great deal of talent... but yet get nowhere with it. And I've met people like that, lots of people who have I'm a musician, I play the guitar, and I've met a lot of guitarists who are just mind-blowingly good.
Yeah.
And they are nobodies. Yeah. Literally, you could argue social media gives them a platform or can give them a platform, and there are certainly a lot of incredibly talented individuals on social media. But for each of those that succeed, there's a whole plethora of those that just don't. And they sort of very mediocre musicians tend to succeed for whatever reason. Now, people could probably peel back my analysis and go, I'm doing it wrong, and saying, actually, there could be a whole bunch of other reasons why they have succeeded. But I would certainly say having this... these sort of what Lord Henry refers to as beauty being the highest form of genius, having that to foreground is certainly not a harmful addition, if that makes sense. Yeah,
it enhances chances.
Yeah,
absolutely. And there is an injustice down to who gets... Well, how did you say it's successful? Well, I would pick on that a little bit and say, what is the success? How are we going to measure the success? Because if the success is the spotlight that a modern pop artist has for 5 years of their life, and then they have to reconcile the rest of their life with their shallow existence, and that everybody knows them for a sexualized, cinematic performance of music, is that success?
Yeah,
well, I don't know. It seems, if we look at Dorian Gray and at the picture that he presents, doesn't seem to be so much of a success.
No, and this is where I think Oscar Wilde nailed it there. I think he nailed exactly, realistically, the outcome. Whether it's visually happens. I think psychologically the impact of something like fame, for example, is...
undeserved fame.
Undeserved fame, especially.
Because Mozart, I don't think, obviously he was in way smaller circles than pop stars are now. We have this whole opening of the society, which, by the way, I would also argue has something to do with the de-elitization of music. Mozart's music was very, and I don't mean this in a traditional oppressive way, but it was very elitist, it was very specialized. You needed to have a lot of knowledge about music.
Yeah.
But I forgot my point now. But
I agree. The social dynamic, the social circle has changed.
Yeah.
So in a sense, we have to adapt our perspectives to meet that. So, for example, music today, if we're going to stick with music as an example, there are so many more popular genres than there would have been at the time of Mozart. So, for example, I'm not the biggest fan of rap music, for example, but I can appreciate the talent behind it. So I'm certainly not a hater in that sense. I can look at it and go, I personally don't like it, but I can appreciate the talent that goes into producing that music, sort of, especially the poetic side of it, the amount of poetry required for that. So that gives you an example of somebody who doesn't like that music, but it is an extremely popular musical genre. So that certainly doesn't mean that you can say, take my subjective opinion and say, oh, Aryn says he doesn't like rap music, therefore rap music is not a valid form of music. That would be entirely incorrect. So we do have to adapt our perceptions on what is, I guess you could say, what is valid.
Right. But then that was the point I was trying to elaborate on earlier, and I forgot about it. This undeserved fame compared to deserved fame. Because if you actually produce great music for a large audience and you get famous, obviously that all has negative consequences as well, because fame is just very exhausting, but you will have a leg to stand on, right? Because you have produced something that has moved the mass, the people.
I mean, Dorian Gray has no redeeming qualities, excepting for his hedonistic lifestyle. So, he doesn't have the eloquence of Lord Henry. He doesn't have the philosophy of Lord Henry. He's just got his youthful beauty, and that's it. He doesn't
have the artistic imaginary of Basil Hallward. And we hear this in the middle part of the story. We hear sort of a time lapse. Like it goes into the future, 15 years or something, and it quickly summarizes up all of the things that Dorian Gray touches on. And he basically touches on any single subject in world history, but he's not really anything with anything.
No.
Like, he touches on the Prussian military in Germany and starts studying it, but loses interest after a month and moves on. He studies the socialist movement, but is not really interested and moves on. It's like everywhere and nowhere.
Yeah. Do we have that problem with, I mean, I know we speak a lot about social media, but I mean, it's probably the quite right thing. Do we have that sort of problem where there's so much information that gets gets out there? So in terms of little bites, if you like
shorts,
shorts, but I'm just thinking bites of information, sort of to put it in a technological way. Dorian Gray himself has little bites of information, but nothing sticks. Do we get a sense that is in a sense creeping in now? We're getting lots of bites of information, but not enough substance.
Absolutely, the substance is left to the search engine. Right. If I need substantial knowledge of how to fix a radiator, I'm going to Google it. I don't use my brain. What my brain needs to know is how to Google it.
Yeah, that's true.
And similarly, with a lot of topics, you get introduced into concepts and into ideas, into chemical processes, into physical occurrences, into philosophical concepts and all of that, but it's all on a very shallow level because you start moving on and then you drift around. And
So I would have a slight change in direction.
Yes,
but
please.
It is quite an interesting one, I think. Speaking of hedonism specifically. We've obviously outlined already in this in this discussion why we perhaps don't think it's the best way to go forward.
Right.
But it is a lifestyle that exists, and it is a lifestyle that is a popular lifestyle.
Yes.
And in a sense, as somebody who's analysed this to, I guess, on a slightly more less on a surface level, slightly on a deeper level, I do get the feeling that there are a lot of people that are almost willing the collapse of those individuals that are engaging in a hedonistic practice. So again, I don't like using examples, but certain individuals that have met their end because they're hedonistic, but they haven't actually physically done anything wrong other than be living that lifestyle. So in other words, there's a lot of knives out for these people, unnecessarily so. So, I mean, I say unnecessarily so, but it's almost a case of willing the downfall of someone simply because they're leading a lifestyle that you don't necessarily agree with. Do you think that is something that is actually occurring?
Yes.
At least from my analysis, that's what I am seeing.
Yes, I think that you can look at a lot of people, prominent figures in acting, in music, and on social media influencers, and you can see how they sort of get blamed for their fall, if that is sort of what you're getting.
Exactly.
They get blamed for the fall, but they got hyped before for their lifestyle, and there is no connection that gets made that is consistent throughout these things whatsoever. I have a couple of examples in my head actually about it.
Go for it. I mean,
no,
okay.
like one can think about a couple of rap artists that have recently made very controversial statements.
I think everybody knows who we're talking about there. So.
Yeah, but everybody, like, it's not a surprise. Like, this is not coming out of thin air, right?
Yeah,
but it was hyped before, even though there was always a minority that said, well, everything needs to be watched more critically. The mainstream just hyped the living hell out of it. And now it's like, oh my God, how could this come? How could this person develop such views? And it's like, well, of course, I mean...
Well, the writing was on the wall right at the beginning, wasn't it? So...
But, yeah. So I guess that, in a certain sense, that happens. But it's similar to the logic that Lord Henry outlines, right? As long as it's beautiful, it has the right to reign supreme.
Sure.
But as soon as it falls, as soon as it stops...
So that would raise the question of going on to conceptions of beauty specifically, but if we were to unravel that and look at that a bit deeper, what do we mean by beauty? Mm-hmm. So Lord Henry's looking at beauty merely as the manifested form of beauty, in a sense. In youth, because exactly that's how that's directly how he's contextualizing it. But if you were to look at it at a more, I guess you could say, philosophical level, beauty as the highest form of genius, I don't actually disagree with that statement. I think it depends what you mean by beauty, though.
Right.
So if we were looking at the beauty, say Sybil's innocence, for example, as a form of beauty, her talent as a form of beauty,
her striving,
somebody who is highly virtuous, for example, could be a form of beauty in a sense. We don't have to look at this as beauty as simply being a physical manifestation. We can also look at it as an inner an inner exposition, if you like.
I mean, it's sort of to some extent what Lord Henry refers to as well. He says that there is this mindset of youth when you're still flexible and when the world is still open and it's still an adventure, and all of that goes along with that, and that slowly dies. But then there is nothing to replace it, right? So in a more balanced worldview, you would say, well, you lose your youth, but in capitalist societies, you gain money, or you gain wisdom, or you gain right. There is a trade-off, and there is still utility outside of this particular frame of beauty, and opens it up to all the other forms that you have elaborated on.
I also think Lord Henry, in a sense, is arguing for cynicism, against cynicism. So the older, a stereotypical example would be the older you get, the more cynical you get, in a sense. Whereas when you're younger, you're more optimistic, tend to be.
Naive.
Not naive, but in a sense, I don't think that's necessarily bad. Naivety can be construed as being a bad trait, but in a sense, being cynical to the point that you don't do anything or have zero adventure in your life, I would say is even worse trait to have.
Absolutely.
And you certainly see that happen a lot, especially as individuals get older, and we were talking about get comfortable in their position. In a sense, that sort of kills the adventurous lifestyle.
So I would like to make a really quick excursus here to a paper I recently read about metacognition, because I think it links in quite well. Yeah. So this author, whose name I don't remember anymore, he outlines 3 stages of cognitive development, somewhat like Piaget, but not really. He outlines them as 3 broad philosophical thinking categories. The third is thinking in absolutes. This is right, this is wrong, and all that kind of stuff. The second is, as I would term it, a sort of postmodern thinking, which is, well, it depends on your point of view. Everything depends on your point of view, which would be sort of a cynical view, right? And I don't mean this judgmental. It's like everything is sort of, I don't take this.
Sitting on the fence, very, actually, let's park that, we'll come back to that, but go with the third one.
And the third one would be the weighing. So you have different, very complicated sets, and you try to infer value.
We've spoken about this before, so I'm going to use a
evidence.
word here, synthesis. Are you thinking that?
Right.
Not in
relation to Marx, or no. So he says, well, there is this inference that you can make. So you use your past experience and you sort of try to get a value judgment. And I think Mr. Henry, Lord Henry, is stuck in a cynical postmodern view, combined with declaring the beauty of youth into the absolute.
Yeah.
Right? But there is no further detailed evaluation of it. And then Dorian Gray, bless his heart, is forced to live that out. It's like, oh God. Yeah. But anyways, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. I mean, the idea of weighing, I think, is very important, actually. There's a concept within causal theory called inference to the best explanation. I won't go into too much detail on that, but it sort of does follow that idea as you can't know everything. No. You have to make inferences at some point, and that inference has to be critical.
Yeah.
You can't just rely on the subjective, sort of sitting on the fence, cynical view. Some people might disagree with us on that view, but I do agree with you. I think that type of attitude of this sort of, it's all perspective based, is somewhat cynical. And it's somewhat uncritical as well. I think
it's hypercritical in another part. Because every
do you want to
argument,
explain that a little bit?
Well, you can counter every argument that somebody makes by pointing towards that is their own subjective view.
But then you cover no ground in that way. You're not progressing any discussion.
No,
you just simply have cynical. Yeah, exactly. You just simply end up in an argumentative form, where it's like argumentation for the sake of argumentation. It's like, what does that ever achieve? Nothing really. I'd argue a lot of debates end like that, where sort of each individual's come with what they want to say. They haven't come for an actual discussion. They just want to.
It's just negating, right?
Exactly.
Just whatever the other says, well, no, I don't think that's true.
I mean...
It's a teenager attitude. That's why it was outlined in the metacognition stage. And, in the stages of...
I mean, there has to be a level of maturity. And I think Dorian Gray, if we contextualize this in the book, is forever immature in their approach. It's sort of almost looking... I think... I mean, I'm not sure, I'm not a psychologist, but nor am I a child therapist in any way. But... I am familiar with the idea of sort of young adults, but if you even regress that even further to sort of preteen as well, it's this idea of wanting everything now, in a sense. Not being able to understand that, not even acknowledging consequences for one's actions. I don't think that's necessarily the highlighted point, but almost a case of not recognizing that there's more to something than just what's in front of you. I think that is, for Dorian especially, he's missing out on so much simply by following the hedonistic pattern. So if I can just borrow a moment to go into a slight tangent, there is a point to it. There's a concept outlined by, there's an interesting paper written by a person called Wolf, who wrote a paper on moral saints, for example. So this idea of morality, a saint, for example, can't possibly be a happy person.
No.
Because they're completely overcome by the desire to do moral good, in a sense. So you spoke about the one form in metacognition as being absolutism. That would be a form of absolutism. So their lifestyle would be an absolutist one. But the problem is, in an analysis of that, is we're looking at it from an observer perspective. So there is an observer paradox, if you like, because it's a case of, well, how do I know that they're not living their life to their fullest by having that extent? So for Dorian Gray, it's easy for us to say he's not living his life to the fullest because he's missing out on all X, Y, and Z type, there's no substance there. There's no love. There's no...
But you would say, well, there is no alternative. Do I understand it correctly?
Yes.
Because we don't know if there is an alternative for the person.
So, from one analysis point of view, it could be to say that, well, we can't really objectively say that Dorian Gray isn't living his life to the fullest. He's not getting the most experience. Oscar Wilde says otherwise because he gives us the direct the direct implication that actually this is the result, doesn't end well for him. I don't think anybody can actually make the argument that this is something that is necessarily a good way. But nevertheless, it does sort of have, if we were to, maybe not for Dorian Gray, but to look at it in other areas, it's very tricky, I think, to just subjectively transpose our ideas onto somebody else and say,
Absolutely.
That's how it must be.
Absolutely.
And I do see, again, to go back to the point you made earlier, while I personally don't agree with the hedonistic lifestyle, there's lots of lifestyles I don't agree with, but I'm not going to transpose or impose my own lifestyle onto that and say, that's incorrect.
No. So, you're absolutely correct. You don't know what is going on for the person. This is also something that is psychologically always relevant.
Yeah.
It's like when you see somebody who has a messy life, you don't know how far they have come to have achieved that state of messy life.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? They could come from an absolute horror show of a past and are finally at this point, and then you come and judge them for it.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that's not what we're doing. However, I think that you can... So first of all, I would say that we're talking about it for society as a whole.
Yeah.
I think we can do that because
so
it's
there
not
would be a critical mechanism there. Yeah.
Right, because it's not directed against anybody personally.
Yeah.
So we're just outlining philosophical concepts and opposing them, and the value judgment there is just necessary. And then the other thing I always think is, even though you can't say if a person would have been better if they would have done something else because they only live one life, as far as we know at least, you can look at different people, and you can look at if there is people with a similar attitude towards topics such as hedonism who fare differently in life, qualitatively speaking, compared to people who have another attitude. And then you can infer that if one of those groups has subjectively reviewed, and we would talk with the picture of Dorian Gray to give us the subjective feeling of Dorian Gray, because that is bearing all the scars. Subjectively viewed better experience of existence, who are feeling more comfortable with themselves, who are feeling more comfortable in society, who don't have so many resentments. We can infer maybe there's something to this.
So in a sense, we can sort of reflect that on the analogy that we were presenting, slightly earlier about music, for example. There's lots of genres of music, so there's lots of different lifestyles, but then within those genres, there has to be a certain level.
A mechanism.
Exactly. That you are measured. So, I mean, I'm not saying who does the measuring. I don't think it really matters. I think ultimately you have to self-measure. That sounds strange, but yes, you have to measure your own sort of lifestyle, which Dorian I don't think really does properly.
He does in his sleeps.
He tries.
Sometimes he does it in his sleeps, where the horrible thoughts of all of the things he has done wrong come in, and then he suppresses them quickly because he can't think about them for too long without getting too agitated to be happy.
So that's a great line to go on, actually. To what extent is self-analysis useful? Obviously, we're not going to say it's not useful, but to the point where you become depressed over the self-analysis process.
I would say, but this is me subjectively.
Sure.
I would say self-analysis is useful for diagnosis. It's not useful for cure.
Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yes.
Because I think that's a really interesting point.
So if you pay attention to yourself, for example, when I wake up at 4 a.m. and I ruminate, is that a word?
Yeah.
Ruminate about all of the things that are currently happening and all of the ambivalent situations that I have to somehow manage. If I pay attention to that, then I have a diagnosis. I know what the problem is. And I can take that from the self-analysis and I can bring it to somebody else, because I'm not going to be able to solve it by myself, because if I would be able to solve it by myself, I would have already solved it. So you bring it to somebody else, you get the other input, and then in the dialectical process that constitutes that conversation, you're going to be able to figure something out.
I think to add to that, if you don't take it to somebody else, you end up risking fixating.
Right.
So I agree with you.
Just what depressed people do all the time.
Exactly. I absolutely agree with you. It's great for diagnosis. It's terrible for solution because it doesn't lead to the solution itself. There needs to be...
You get into a hole. Right, you spin off solutions, but then you critically evaluate your own spin-off solutions, and
so essentially, what Dorian's doing is he has twofold problem. Number one, he's not communicating his issues with anyone. Number two, if he was to communicate his issues with somebody, it would likely be Lord Henry, which would be met directly with a huge problem suddenly, because it's just re-inferring this idea of no, you're fine.
Because it's the wrong person.
Exactly. So
because Lord Henry fundamentally sees him as a scientific project.
Actually, that's a really good point. Actually, because Lord Henry is in a sense objectifying Dorian Gray himself. He's just a lab experiment in a sense for his own philosophical understanding. I mean, clearly Lord Henry's getting something out of this. Surely he's going to have a very reflective, perhaps I would say a disjointed reflective, almost uncaring reflection, as philosophy can sometimes be, wrongly, but that definitely happens. No, I definitely agree.
Yeah, so he has the secret. He can't tell anybody about it. He can't tell anybody about, which is also something I know from puberty, about all the scars that you get through acting irresponsibly. Yeah, sorry?
Just exactly what you're saying. He doesn't want to tell anyone about it. Question is, does he actually want to tell somebody about it? But he can't. And I say that in a sense, he might want to, but the reason he perhaps done is embarrassment, in a sense. Mm-hmm. It's a bit like when you, everyone's experienced this, I'm sure. I mean, maybe there are some perfect people out there that I'm not aware of, but let's say you tell a lie, for example. You get stuck in that lie.
Yeah.
You want to own up to the truth.
Yeah.
You know it's the right thing to do, but you just can't, because to own up for the truth would to be, again, to go into the fragility part, would to actually indicate your imperfection, in a sense. But also to own up to everything that gets attached to that lie. So, for example, Dorian Gray, Basil actually speaks of Dorian Gray. It says, "Why is your relationships with young men so fatal?" In a sense, everything that, again, this is something we didn't quite touch on, but is important, I think. The hedonistic lifestyle, it isn't just about the self. It has a knock-on effect about everybody that you are involved with.
Yes.
Everybody in Dorian's life ends up dead or in some other way, with the exception of Lord Henry, by the way. But I think, but again, he's a fascinating character. But I think Lord Henry himself is emotionally disconnected from it.
He doesn't get invested with the lifestyle.
All the other characters are emotionally invested
and they bear
Dorian.
the consequences. Yeah, absolutely. It's actually a core point, because if you think, well, that was what correct about the self-centered, which we started the conversation with. What is hedonism? It's self-centered. And this self-centeredness, this momentary self-centeredness, wears heavily on yourself, as we've outlined very thoroughly, but it wears out everybody around you. Because people can't grab you, right?
Absolutely. So if we were to look at this in terms of social media, for example, where, it's a great platform, as we've spoken about, but it's also a great platform for hedonism to sort of just exist on in the most extravagant way.
But just quickly, because we're always very critical of it, at the same extent, we don't have to extend on this, I just want to reference it, there is also other possibilities in social media, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You don't have to follow a hedonistic lifestyle.
No, I agree.
Yeah. You can get different input. You can get input you would normally never get. And
I'll clarify off on top of that, actually, because I think it's an important point. There are people who appear to be hedonistic within social media, but probably aren't. It's just they're using the platform. In other words, it's very easy to say someone's egotistical.
Yeah.
As an external analysis of an individual. Say, they're egotistical because they're putting themselves on a social media platform. They might not be. They may have social anxiety, for example, and they're using that as a tool to try and overcome their social anxiety, in a sense, by getting out there. I've read quite a few studies on people that get involved with online gaming, for example, as a way to overcome social anxiety, to get involved with a community, to try and be able to speak. There are lots of people, for example, with voice in gaming who don't speak on voice because they have anxiety issues and they can't. So, in a sense, by slowly getting involved in that sort of, it can help.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's probably getting slightly bit tangential. But in a sense, the point I'm making is exactly with you: is social media isn't the big evil. And there are people that may certainly appear to be egotistical, and maybe they are, I don't know, but I'm not going to judge. But they might not be, in a sense. They may just be using that for the exact purpose of what the platform is meant to do, to get your voice out there, to be heard, to make a difference, perhaps. Perhaps that is their reason behind doing something. They want to make a difference, which that would be a virtue, I would say, in a sense.
Depends on what difference.
Well, absolutely. I would certainly say there's a lot of people that use social media in a way to make a difference that perhaps is definitely non-virtuous, but yeah.
Okay. So, damages people around you, unfortunately.
Absolutely. It's not an insulated lifestyle.
No, we all live connected. We all live in a community, which is one of the main arguments against the lifestyle, because it's present-centered. It's not centered around the development over time. It is a period, I think, that is absolutely necessary and vital for every human to have had at some point. I mean, I don't have a lot of first-hand experience, but I know that there were some colleagues in my school that were taught by their parents and by their, let's say they were very talented in skiing, for example, which happens in Bavaria sometimes. And they were pushed to this professional skiing career, and they were never able to do that, like just to live, to drink in the evening and to wake up and to have another beer and to hang out with friends for like 2 days. It's so vital that happens, because otherwise it will come back at another point. You need to make the experience.
So that's a really interesting point to actually elaborate on a bit, because experiences are varied, obviously.
Yes.
And I'm going to be very careful here, because we're this is going on YouTube, and I don't want us to get barred in any sense. But
why?
There are certain experiences, I think, in life that people should have an experience of, for example, that would be socially negated by modern society. For example, it would be frowned upon. I'm trying to think of an example that isn't going to get us in hot water here, but
I don't know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. So in a sense, okay, let me abstract it. So perhaps, I don't know, eating.
Also, just say it. We're not earning any money at the moment.
Yeah,
anyway.
that's true.
They can't demonetize somebody.
It's true, but I don't like to example something that I don't personally agree with, but I can understand I wouldn't want somebody to not do it, for example. But I'll use an analogy that I think.
Okay.
So let's say a biscuit.
Yes.
Okay. Everyone likes biscuits. I love biscuits. Okay.
Okay.
But let's say biscuits, according to the social norm, are bad things to eat for whatever reason. Okay. Just hypothetically speaking.
Okay.
So. Okay. Without saying it, I'm sure everyone's kind of getting where I'm going with this now. So. But yet there is something that you can gain by having that experience that will certainly lead to construct your life, in a sense. Whether you continue to eat biscuits or not is irrelevant. It is an experience that is going to add to your life, I would say.
Yes.
And the society, in this hypothetical example, are telling everyone, absolutely not, you must not eat those biscuits.
Well,
I personally don't eat these biscuits, but I'm just saying it is something I think individuals should experience.
And they do.
And they certainly do. But in the example that you laid out, for that type of characterization, those individuals never get to have that experience.
Yes.
They never are able to fully formulate their life with that experience as the background.
Yes.
They have no tangible understanding of that lifestyle. So in a sense, the hedonistic way, just even as a sort of a momentary, the old saying would be go sow your seeds type thing, in a sense, go experience life.
Yes.
But that means experiencing everything in life, not simply the go do really well at university, for example, get a job at the end of it. Yes, you should always be doing that. But a lot of reason why, if we're using university as an example, a lot of reason why people go to university is to experience university life.
Yeah.
not just go get a degree. I think that's really important.
I think the degree is very irrelevant most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to have a degree to be very intelligent, and certainly to do well in life. But
I know what you mean. It's like, so obviously there's people with different personality preferences.
Yeah.
So somebody who is extremely industrious and extremely conscientious, as a rough example, and it doesn't need to be exactly like that, but as an approximation. If somebody has personality traits that tailor him or her or them to be productive all the time, they won't have a lot of use for the hedonistic experience.
Yeah, exactly.
But most of us aren't like that, right? Most of us are normal people, and we lead sort of normal lives. We want to have a full-fledged experience, want to get as much input as possible. And like, you need to have those stages.
I think there is a point, I think, with that Lord Henry was getting at. I don't remember if it's actually mentioned in the book, but it's this idea of living with regret. Mm-hmm. So a hedonistic lifestyle, there's never an opportunity to live with regret, but
it still happens.
It still happens, of course, but I would sort of invert that in a sense. Don't also go on to life and think back, oh wow, I wish I had done that or something, you know.
I mean,
and I got trapped into this way of living that completely prevented me from having those experiences in a sense.
Absolutely.
I don't think that's healthy.
No, I don't think so either.
It's too cloistered as a way of living in a sense.
And we're all different. Like some people want more of moment-to-moment thinking, and it fills them, and you know they are still able to be a well-contributing member of society, and help construct it and help rectify it. It's like, fair enough. You know, we all have different capacities, we all have different preferences, but for the large part of the population, I would say that you need a balanced approach to everything.
Balance is the key word there.
And this is not balanced. This book, so neither is the hyper-industrious young athlete that has to work from
completely agree.
10 years until 40 and then gets dropped like a hot potato. Yeah. But this isn't either.
No.
Right? This is not the answer.
No, absolutely.
You need to grow out of it. You need to take on duties.
In a sense, you used the word the facade earlier. We could say the same thing about social media. Yeah. And I'm not picking on social media. I'm just simply saying, as an example, it is the facade in a sense. It's not reality.
No.
But yet it has been lived out as reality, and it has been portrayed through the media perception as a reality. It's not balanced. There are plenty of people that can be on social media and be extremely balanced individuals, have wonderful experiences, and continue in life to have a balanced, but the way that it has been represented is imbalanced, much like Dorian Gray is an imbalanced individual.
Right.
So that's where I see the key issue.
Absolutely. And if people are able to do that, to separate the online, more archetypal, absolute representation of a lifestyle compared to their private life, it's awesome, super, fair enough. But then you have kids.
Yes.
And kids grow into that world.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
For younger people, I think at least the online world is as important as the real world, maybe a lot more important, maybe actually a hell of a lot more important. Yeah. If I look, for example, at a society that I'm currently a member in, we meet 2 times a week for training, but the Facebook group chat seems to be constantly going.
Sure, yeah.
Right? It doesn't stop every day.
Yeah.
So what is more important? The meeting 2 times a week, or what is getting communicated there? And
how much would you miss in that communication if you weren't part of that Facebook group, for example?
Not, right?
Yeah.
Which I am not.
Yeah,
so I regularly come to training and I get updated on all of those things that are not happening. I'm like, oh, okay, right.
But you know, there is that sort of key issue where so much of it'd be easy to sort of view what I'm saying as demonizing social media, for example. I think it's the complete opposite. And we're both gamers, right? You're a gamer. Yeah. Okay, I'm probably more of a gamer than you are.
I think you're more of a gamer than me. But
so if you go back to the early 90s, it's my age now, but gaming was way more demonized than it is today, for example.
Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. Well, there's a fantastic
Satan's
one.
game.
Yeah, exactly. But look how much good it can give you. So
and look at how much bad it... No, I'm joking.
It's terrible. I don't know. It's very evil.
I don't know, actually. But you get to live out evil fantasies.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Actually, that's a really interesting point. I don't know how tangential this would be, but no, I think it's contextual. Dorian Gray is living out a fantasy at the end of the day.
He's an archetype.
Yeah, exactly. So living out the fantasy, to what extent would be, and we can go so many different directions with this. We can look at Dungeons and Dragons, or we can create a hypothetical scenario with virtual reality, where virtual reality gets to the point where you are able to live out your wildest fantasies. We can almost say that the internet, social media certainly allows that.
I've heard recently that seems to be a not too niche thing to have virtual reality parties. So you get a 6-pack of beer and alcohol, and then you have a party with your friends all over the globe, in a virtual reality room.
So you get virtual reality girlfriends now as well.
Yep.
Did you? I think it was the chatbot Replica, if I'm not mistaken. They did away with the NSW. I never can pronounce that. Not safe for work. Version of that server of that chat because of whatever reason they did. And there was a huge outcry about it because lots of people were going on there and engaging with that bot in that certain type of way. So you're living out a fantasy reality, if you like.
Yes.
So I suppose this is almost an entirely different subject and should almost deserve a video unto itself. But to what extent is that helpful for an individual to experience that fantasy? For Dorian Gray, it's not helpful because it ends in tragedy. So in a sense, his fantasy lifestyle, living it out doesn't work out well for him. And sort of we're now sort of almost contradicting what we said earlier, that having life's experiences, but I would argue that there is balance in what we're trying to represent. So yeah, living out that just as a pure hypothetical scenario, we do live in an age soon where perhaps not too soon, the metaverse, for example, things like that, virtual reality, you will be able to go on there and put a headset on and be wherever you want to be. Perhaps even engage with bots now that have that aren't even human. So programmed to almost there's a really good film, by the way, called Strange Days, if anyone wants to see how this plays out, with Ralph Fiennes. I think it was Ralph Fiennes, yeah, or Fiennes, how we pronounce that.
Joaquin Phoenix.
Well, his movie was the one where he falls in love with the phone. Is that the one that you're thinking of?
No.
Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, so to what extent is that useful? There's an interesting question. Or are we in a position where we just aren't able to know right now?
We can't know.
Yeah.
I mean, everything is always ambivalent. That's the great thing about our world that we live in. And everything can be good and bad depending on how it gets utilized.
There's a great quote in that book, actually. Lord Henry says, there's no such thing as a book that is immoral, in a sense. So, okay, there's a point to go on. Is the hedonistic lifestyle in of itself immoral? I know we've outlined that it is useful to experience.
Yes.
In a sense, and it certainly doesn't have to be. I don't think it has to go to the extent of being immoral, but if pursued in pursued in a direction that's just more than just an experience, if you like, it becomes a way of life. Is it inherently immoral?
I would say it's by definition immoral. It's immoral by its essence, because you don't care about moral, you care about your self-interest.
Yeah.
So if we juxtapose those two things quickly, moral law, either written or within yourself, is there to guide you and to give you a frame of how to conduct yourself and how to limit yourself throughout a variety of instances. If you're not allowed to kill, for example, that is something that is off limits, even though maybe in a momentary situation you would like to have the impulse to kill somebody.
Sure.
Which Dorian Gray does.
Yeah.
So his life, and I think that's similar to the cynical view of things, is by definition immoral. Right? The cynic judges, he doesn't judge at all.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I don't actually have anything to add there because I think that's absolutely correct. So, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yep. I think we're good.
Yeah, I think I've almost exhausted. I mean, there are more themes obviously to go through. Oscar Wilde, but perhaps another day for that.
Perhaps another day. Right.
Do we have a book for next week? Because I think we did speak about perhaps Fahrenheit 451
Yes.
or 1984 as being
Let's do
potentials.
Fahrenheit 451
Okay,
because
fantastic.
1984 I've read when I was a child, but the other one I
Okay,
actually haven't.
fantastic. So we can talk about book burning and all fun stuff next week.
Yeah. Who was that? The German, as a quick teaser, I think. Oh.
Are you
German
thinking of
poet.
the German quote? First you burn books, then you burn people.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
We're getting already starting into the next conversation next week.
Anyways, thanks for
Yep.
tuning in, and if you've made it to this point, well done.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, hopefully see you all.
We'll see you next time. Yeah,
See you next time,
absolutely.
yeah. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you. Cool.